Good evening, everybody. My name is Anna Inario, and I'm one of the folks that helped put on the PARC Forum here. We're so excited to have two individuals speak tonight. One is a PARC Forum alum who's spoken here many times, Don+Norman. He's a business person, an academic, co-founder of the Nielsen-Norman Group, and he serves on several boards, written numerous books, Emotional Design, Living with Complexity, and Design of Everyday Things, which will actually be selling outside and you can purchase on your way out if you'd like. Also, we have here Patrick Whitney, who is the Dean of the IIT Institute of Design. He's been called the Design Visionary by Business Week, as well as a Master of Design by Fast Company. His recent work has been supported by several different grants, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as S.C. Johnson and the Steelcase Foundation. So please join me in welcoming these two individuals, and we're very happy to have them at the PARC Forum tonight. Thank you very much.
And this is the Patrick and Don show. And actually, half the show is you. So we're going to talk for a short while, and then we're going to open it up to this audience, this half-empty audience. Half full. We'll see. You know, I gave a talk recently, and I was in Italy, in Lucca, and the audience was jammed, and I got introduced, and as soon as the introduction was over, half the people left the auditorium. It was bizarre. And the longer we talked, the more people left and left and left. Until there were 5 people at the end who said, "Oh, we really enjoyed it."
But they're locking the doors now as we speak.
No, we want more to come in, more to come in.
So this is our third event like this. We were in Toronto a couple months ago and in Chicago. Thank you. This is our fourth event, I guess. We were in Chicago a month ago. We were at the Autodesk auditorium last night, and here we are today. And what we're doing is a number of things. One is its reflections on the way human-centered design and design research and user observation is changing, and also to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Don's book. It's really hard to write a book. It's really hard to write a book that is good, and even harder to write a book that lasts. And 25 years is phenomenal. It's hard to think that. So, round of applause for Mr. Norman.
Thank you.
One of the reasons it's so important is that design, I think I and some others think that we're perhaps in a design bubble where there's more hype and promise about what design can do than what design is able to deliver. And it's not that design doesn't have those abilities, but design hasn't formalized those abilities into coherent theories and methods. And Don's book is one of the shining examples, far too few examples, but one of the shining examples of doing that. That's why it's
Yeah, but
so
people
important.
still don't get it. Just today I got an email from a reporter from Inc. magazine, INC, Inc., asking, well, how come design is so popular? Is it because maybe the new materials make it easier to make beautiful objects? And I say, God, no, design is not about beautiful objects. Design is about objects that fit your needs, that make your life better. And yeah, good designers make beautiful things, but that's a small part of what design is about. And that still is a misunderstanding, and that's one of the real problems in getting design out. I can't believe we still have that misunderstanding, but we do. The same thing happened last night. Somebody asked about usability, and I kept saying, who cares about usability? And I meant that in the following sense. Who cares about plumbing? It's really important that you have good plumbing, and it's really important that it work, but it's something that's not where the leading edge is. That's the sort of thing we want to take for granted. And that's how I'd like to think about usability, but it's not true. It's not true at all. It's amazing how many people, well, I just build it this way. If you can't use it, well, you shouldn't be using it. Or, didn't you read the manual? Or whatever. Or as one of my good friends who works at PARC once told me, there are bugs and there are features. And what's the difference? If it's in the manual, it's a feature.
And in the first version of the manual where it wasn't in, they decided to add it in the second version.
Right. It's
Turn
much
it
easier
from
to
a
add
bug
to the
a
manual
feature.
than to fix the problem.
Exactly. Last night, Carl Bass was on the stage with us, and he was talking about his first experience with trying to use BMW's iDrive. And after spending half an hour not being able to figure it out, the BMW salesman said, "Your problem, Mr. Bass, is you just don't understand computers."
And for those of you who don't know, he's the CEO of Autodesk.
I think the problem is, as fast as companies discover they need designers, and designers learn to work with companies, as fast as that happens, there are two things happening faster. Business schools and engineering schools are turning out people who are good analysts and good engineers but don't know about design. And design schools are turning out people who think design is art and don't know about technology or business.
In fact, they go to design because they don't like science and technology and mathematics. And then, of course, they're asked to design high-tech things. And what they're really trained in design school, some of you probably, how many of you are trained in design schools? Small percentage. So it depends what school you're trained in. But if you go to a RISD, say, or Pasadena, you really become good craftspeople. And you're really wizards at it. But you don't know anything about the world. And after being fantastic at materials and drawing and prototyping, you design a health system. So where do you get the background and knowledge for that? And design has changed a lot, and design education is not kept up. And that's actually a major issue that we face. Except, of course, for the Institute of Design in Chicago, which is unique. In fact, lots of designers don't like the school. They say, well, the people who come out of that are not designers. Well, yeah, thank goodness. I'm on their board, so I'm biased. One thing we wanted to know is who you are, because I couldn't predict who would come to a PARC Forum for this particular talk. So, how many of you are engineers? I could start dividing that up into what kind. How many of you are computer scientists? How many involved with consumer products?
How many are MBAs? Wow.
How many are business managers or executives? So,
And how many work in companies with 10,000 employees or more?
how many work in startups?
We've got the most diverse audience we've
Yeah.
Ask how many are designers.
We did that ask before. Oh, no, I asked art trade. How many of you consider yourselves designers?
So I have no idea what we're going to say to this audience.
Well,
How many of us weren't any of those but just enjoyed your work?
that's a good question.
The first of it.
But actually, one of the ways this often works really well is it's human-centered design for the talk. Because after all, we should talk about things you care about. And how on earth are we ever going to know what this diverse group cares about except by asking you? So we'll do this earlier than we planned. Why don't we just, what we normally do is we talk for 10 or 15 minutes and then we throw it open to the group. Well, we're going to throw it open to the group. And both of us actually have answers for almost anything you ask. Now, we may differ. And I may decide, whatever answer he gives, I may decide to argue against it.
And whatever answer I give tonight may be different than what I give tomorrow night.
So why don't we start with some, yes?
I like the question I've been looking at for a month.
Why would anyone buy this thing?
You know, as the technology gives us 3D printing and all these, all the additive manufacturing and many different kinds of manufacturing, we're getting to where pretty soon you can just imagine a thing and have that thing built. So how do you decide what's a good thing to build? Because resources aren't unlimited, but ideas are getting there.
Right, and that actually is, well, the reason it's a question there, because it is a really good question and a difficult question, and one for, because there are many actually different issues about that. One of them is, well, let me just take two extremes, incremental innovation and radical innovation. Incremental is where I'm going to take a look at the existing products, and then I can go out and do what's called human-centered design, which he will argue against in a few minutes, about basically watching people use it. And we discover where your problems are and where your difficulties are. And actually, one of the examples I like to give is the Xerox copier. It's nothing about Xerox, so don't worry. It's about, if you watch people doing copies, quite often they'll, I have a big thing and I want to reduce it in size. So I put it on the platen and I say, oh, I don't know, about 75%, and I push the button and it's, oh no, it's the wrong size. And besides, it's, it cut off something because I didn't have it in the right place. So then I move it to where I think is the right place, and I adjust the size. And I do this 5 or 6 times, and then it comes out right. And if you ask somebody if they had any difficulty using the machine, they will say no. And that's because this doesn't appear to be the machine's problem. It was, well, I didn't know what percentage to reduce it, and I didn't quite know where to put it, and yeah, that wasn't right, so it was easy. I just moved it up a bit more until it was right. But those of us watching can say, well, that was unnecessary. We could devise a system where it didn't matter. You told us how big the resulting print should be, and you tell us, and you just put it on the platen, and we'll figure the rest out. But if you ask people, they would never have guessed that because it seemed normal. So that's one set of incremental innovation you can do. That's easier to do. I think we can find that out by market testing, by user testing, by observation. We can do prototypes and test. If you're a Samsung, you might say, the cell phone, I don't know how big to make it. And there are these tablets that Apple makes, but they're kind of big and you can't put it in your pocket. Gee, Kindle made one that was smaller. So what's the right size? And they said, I know what we'll do. We'll make one of every possible size. Well, it's a way of user testing, and that's what they did. And I've talked to the Samsung people about it. It was very deliberate. And they watched and they saw what people buy, and so first of all, different markets have different size requirements. And second of all, some don't work well, so they stopped making them. But then there's the third one, and this is where we'll turn to Patrick, which is you've invented some new thing. Now, how do you know?
So new things, new categories of things, or things that are radically different. You can think of things as incremental change, or jump change, or leap change. The middle one, jump change, would be line extensions into a new area. What's changing is the advent of systems and platforms. And designers trying to get it right and do the exquisite final product is going to go away for most categories of things. I'd like to think of it as the difference between roughly right versus precisely wrong. And what designers need to do is work on platforms instead of final products. It's going to be a big change in design because we don't get to do the final craftsmanship. The final spec will be done by the user, either on 3D printing or sending information back to the factory where it gets customized. And the designer won't have the joy that they find now in designing the final thing. The user will have the joy of making things. The whole world isn't going to go this way, but let's take a mundane category like the furniture industry, Steelcase, which I'm very familiar with. They have a SKU problem like most big companies do. They make too many things and makes management complexity. If they could do the basic architecture of each chair and let the density of the cushion and the fabric and the armrests and things be customized, they could get variety that was customized so it was less wasteful, but still have the efficiency of mass producing the final thing. So
it's the Harley Davidson of furniture making. You buy a Harley, and very few people drive the Harley when they buy it. They go to the custom shop and get it customized. And they can often spend as much money customizing the Harley as the purchase price.
And the Mini Cooper S, 90% of them are customized. You can watch your car being made in the factory. But it's going to be a big change for engineers and analysts because you're not going to know what the final thing is. There's going to be a higher degree of uncertainty, and it's going to be a big change for designers because you don't get to craft the final thing. So that whole production, design, conceptualization aspect is going to be turned upside down.
But that's also slightly different than coming out with something dramatically new. That's a way of changing something that already exists and modifying it to something that maybe fits your style better. But if you really wanted it dramatically new, we don't know. There's no way of knowing if it's going to take off. And that most of the things that do take off take decades. The Xerox copier is a good example. The first xerographic machine. It took a lifetime, actually, before it was accepted. And when I joined Apple, the first product they were releasing, I just was joined, so I had nothing to do with it because I had just started at Apple, but I saw this wonderful product. And I said, wow, that's exciting. I bet it changes the whole world. Well, it failed. And they came out with the second version, and it failed. And they came out with the third version, and it failed, and they gave up. So what was this product that I thought was going to be so great, and it failed? It was a camera that didn't require film. Okay, and so what was the problem with it? The problem really was very simple. It was too soon. The infrastructure didn't support it. The camera could only hold 8 pictures. That was not the problem because that's all a roll of film had. But it was hard to get the pictures out of the camera into your computer, and your computer could barely hold the pictures. And then what did you do with it? Inkjet printers didn't exist. You would send it to somebody else. That was the whole notion. You could take a picture at a construction site and email it to somebody, and so you would get your phone out and you would plug it into your 300 baud modem. Many of you don't, the older ones do, but the younger people don't know what 300 baud is. It means 30 bytes per second. Not kilobytes, not megabytes, 30 bytes per second. It took forever. And it was just too soon. And the way I like to do it is I like to talk about this landscape of products. And here's all the variation, and here's, say, quality or acceptance level or goodness or something. And they're hills. And human-centered design, it gets you up the hill, because what happens is you look and say, oh, I can make it better. And so the next release is better. And then the next release is better. It goes higher and higher and higher to get to the top of the hill. But it never gets you off that hill. You're stuck at the local maximum. And so here we have the camera's getting better and better, and now we invent a new camera, which is here, which is on a much higher hill, but lower down.
This problem of hills is a problem in both the CS world and in the design world. In the CS world, there's this conflict with lean and agile and getting it right. The teams I've worked on with software developers who say we're going to use lean and agile promise me they can pivot to whatever thing we need as we go forward. Then as we take our first steps into the project and they start coding, and I'd say, well, let's try this, their answer is invariably, oh, we can't do that. That's too big of a change. That's a big change. Their idea of a big change and the designer's idea of a big change are quite different. At the same time, designers are at fault in that they believe user research can tell them what the right thing to do is. And that's the wrong way to use user research in design. The samples are too small. You can't count on them to be statistically valid. What you should be doing is not looking at mainstream users, who you expect your market to be, but to look at people on the edges, the non-users, the extreme users. And you're not after what users will do, you're after what users might do. And then you use the intelligence and the wisdom and the intuition of the team to be jarred by that user insight, but not to do what the users, not to mimic what the users are doing.
But I do want to tell you, you said this last night, and I wanted to
I was
correct
right then
you a little
and
bit.
I'm right now.
Well, no. If we're making a product for an expert, we can do that. We can study the expert and make it that fits just right. If we're making a product that is to be used by everybody in the world, well, geez, how are you going to do that? But if you look at automobiles and computers and phones and cameras, it's basically the very same identical product sold all over the world. There, I think what we did is we didn't study the people, we studied the activity. and we made it fit the activity, and people were willing to learn whatever it required to do to fit the activity. Now, it has to be kind of human-centered, but activities are human-centered.
Yeah, you're right.
But that wasn't the point I wanted to make. If you wanted to study people, though, the IDEO approach is, because you were saying if you study the average person, then well, what do you do with the extremes? But IDEO says, no, it's a convex space. And what we want to do is you want to study people all around the edges. Because if we can satisfy all of them, then we will automatically satisfy everybody inside that space. And that's not a bad way of doing it.
No, that's what I was trying to say. At the edges, including non-users as well as extreme users, as well as people who are using other things to accomplish the same thing. We did an executive program for the president and the top 20 people who manage the fabric care business of Procter & Gamble. This was David Kelly, Roger Martin, and I. And they do 1,000 ethnographies a year on Tide. And we told them we were going to do user research, and they said, yeah, we do that. And I said, but we're not going to do it on Tide. And they said, well, why would you not do it on Tide? And we said, well, we're going to focus on the activity. And we might be doing laundry. And they didn't quite know why we would do doing laundry, because that wasn't detergent. And then we said, or we might do it on taking care of clothes. And they thought we were truly crazy. Or we might do it on looking good. So they were getting angrier and angrier as we went through. And they would have stopped it had Lafley not insisted they go through with it. Then we screened for users. And we didn't even screen for people who use detergent. And we paid them to document their life about taking care of clothes for 2 weeks. And the photographs came back. And lo and behold, in the collection of photographs, there were no pictures of Tide and hardly any pictures of detergent. So now they had proof, confirmation that we were crazy and that Lafley was wrong and they shouldn't be doing this. But they interviewed the users, and we screened them not for detergent using, but people who use 6 clothing products or services a week. So dry cleaning clothes after one use, spot remover, bleach, color enhancer, detergents, etc. And the story, the senior execs, after interviewing the users who didn't talk to them about detergent, were enthralled by what the users were saying 15 minutes into their interviewing the users. And they knew that they had put together the best program that they had ever had because they were getting so much new information from these users who weren't hearing about Tide. So looking at the activity is the way to do it. But
And by
had
the way, you should always
we looked at
study,
Tide users, they would have learned nothing new.
You should always study people who don't use your product, because there are more of them than there are users.
But it's rare that
And those are the
companies
ones
have
that you
insight.
actually want to sell to.
Yeah.
People already using your product. Yes.
When you asked for groups, you didn't ask for retired people, so I guess I'll be a representative of one. I finally broke down and got an iPad, which has been an amazing experience in trying to figure out how to use it. In fact, I learned more from my 9-year-old granddaughter last week than I've ever been able to learn from anybody else who tried to help me. So my question is, we're getting older and the group is getting bigger. Is there a design process that will help do something to try and give us, in our group, something new?
I don't believe we need a special design process.
Correct.
I think the design process that we teach and that we follow is about people. And that if we design things appropriately for people, it is going to be better for people, which includes people who are retired like me. I mean, I'm really good at retiring. I've retired several times already. And I just took a new job, so I guess I'll retire a third time. I don't think we should try to design for special people. We should design, again, for the proper activities. Now, why are retired people special? There are lots of reasons why they're special. One is that you have more free time. I don't, but you do, I hope. And second is you might have more money, at least a discretionary income to spend. And you can start doing the things you've always wanted to do. And if you take a look at Toyota makes this car for teenagers, right? It's sort of square and boxy. Honda makes one too, the Fit, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And the Toyota is the Scion. And it was made for teenagers because they could decorate it, and they could do things in it, and so
Plug
on.
their
And
music into it.
guess who? Yeah, and guess who buys them? It's retired people. Because retired people don't consider themselves old. You consider yourself young, right? But for the first time, I have the money to do what I always wished I could do when I was a teenager. And time, I'm not taking classes, and I don't have these other requirements. So again, the same with people who can't see well, or can't hear well, or have difficulties, other difficulties. If we make it so it works better for them, it works better for everybody. And so that's what our design process tries to do. I think the traditional demographics is exactly the wrong way to do things.
Yeah. One of the reasons things for old people are so bad is because they design them for old people.
The secret of OXO's success when they made the first vegetable peeler was it was really designed for an arthritic woman her hands hurt and she couldn't hold the traditional vegetable peeler. And it was never advertised for arthritis. It was advertised as a better vegetable peeler. And that way, everybody said, hey, it's better, and they bought it. And the people who had arthritis, they discovered it, and the word spread, and they bought it. If you had made it for them, first of all, nobody wants to admit they have a deficit, so they probably would have shunned it. And normal people would say, well, I don't have arthritis, I don't need it.
Well, there actually is, in Sweden, an equivalent product with big fat handle. And it's designed for people with arthritis only, unlike OXO. And it doesn't cost $5 for a potato peeler, it costs $50 for a potato peeler. Because the thing is ugly and no one will buy it. What Sam Farber did when he made OXO is he made it acceptable to people who like to cook, who people would like to cook if they had time, people who wanted good kitchens, and people who liked the image of a good kitchen. So the market was orders of magnitude larger, driving the price down to a still expensive $5 a potato peeler.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because we don't want to design for you. We want to design for everybody. Now, actually, if you want me to get me going, just ask me what I think of the iPad. I think it's a huge step backwards in understandability. We forgot some of the fundamental principles of design, like discoverability. How do I do something? And recoverability. When I finally find the picture I wanted to show you, and I hand it to you, and you grab it, and your hand touches the side, and so it disappears. And how do I get back to it?
Well, you press the back button, Don.
No, I press the main button, which gets me back to the beginning,
Exactly.
and I got to search again.
There is
right?
no back button.
There is no back button, except on the Android, except it's not clear what it does, but that's a different issue. And whatever happened to undo, the greatest invention of all? Actually, it was invented in this very building, I believe.
I'm going to go back to the old people issue again. So when companies think of designing for families, they think of mom and dad and 2 or 3 kids. That demographic represents about 5 to 8% of the American families now. If you look at the number of households by number of people living in them, the largest group is households with 1 person. Half of them are really young and half of them are really old. Try to find a company designing homes and equipment for 1 person. No one is doing it. And you can't ask the consumers whether they want it, because consumers want houses that look like every night is going to be Thanksgiving dinner, even though every night is takeout. And so consumers can't tell you what they want. You have to watch the activities that they do. This issue of not asking people what they want, but looking at their activities is core to design.
Okay, we've now failed to answer 2 people's questions. Anybody else?
Yes, in the red shirt.
I might be mistaken, but I think you just contradicted yourself. You
I'm sorry, we just talked about...
So you said that we should be designing for everyone in response to that person's question? That
No,
we should be
well,
designing for everyone?
If you design for activities, you will make things acceptable for everyone.
Okay. I got the impression you said we should be designing for everyone.
Those may have been the words that came out of my mouth, but that's clearly a bad idea. You can't... we're all too different. And that's why there's a wide variety when you go to the stores. Even, I said cell phones are the same all around the world, but when you go to the cell phone store, there are in fact, the problem there is too many varieties. You don't know which to choose. unless you go to Apple where there's just one. But if you
But you
believe
can
in
customize
if you
it.
believe in the religion, that's appropriate. There should just be one.
Yes, sir.
So as an engineering manager, I spend a lot of time with engineers trying to get them to ultimately build something that is more invisible, to your point about, eliminating the 75% on a copier type of problem. But the problem, especially when you're in a startup, is the resources or the money that you have to spend to try to reach to an ultimate end product. So how do you know when invisible, when you've gotten it good enough, is the basic questions. So you can spend a lot of time on something, but
Well,
how do you
a
get to
problem, startups have difficulty. I'm intimately aware since I'm the co-founder of a startup. But I think that, especially if you're designing things for consumers, one of the critical people you have to have on board early is someone who understands human-centered design. It may not be a trained designer, it may be an engineer, it could be a marketing person, it could be anybody, but you need to start examining that's really needed right away. Now, there's a slight problem here is that you also have to examine what people buy. And people don't necessarily buy what the real needs are. But so it's the minimum viable product argument. You have to figure out what is a minimum thing that will get people excited by what you've done, and therefore they will complain. They'll say, I love this product, but I wish that. That if that's what the result will be, you've won, and that's what you aim at.
The trick is to get to something as fast and cheap as possible so you can do it a second time.
But it has to be good, because if that first release is really crappy, then you're dead. You don't get a second chance. If you're a large company, Apple, you can bring out failures. Apple has, and it didn't matter. But when you're small, you better make it good enough that people can see the potential, and that means focus, and that's going to be hard because you can't hire enough people to cover all the bases.
Yes.
But it seems like in some ways we entered into a beta culture. Everything sort of stays in beta, it's not quite finished.
No. That's because you live here, right? And you have Google that never finishes anything, and you have and you have other companies but that's not the way the real world works.
I worry about then our undue influence on the rest of the world. Do you think Silicon Valley is too tilted one way or another that has a bad influence on the rest of the world, or are we living in our own little bubble here?
I was an advisor, I still am, advisor to a startup where most of the engineering is done in India. And the CEO is here, and some of the key people are here. And the quality control was horrible, just horrible. And I kept complaining. And the CEO said he was back in India. He's Indian, too, so it isn't a culture issue at that point. Trying to explain to them, and they said, we don't understand what the issue is. I mean, Microsoft always sends out crappy code. What's the big deal? And so that answers your question. Yes, we are a bad example.
Yes.
So I've been noodling on this question for a number of years, which is why are consumers generally so cheap? And an example of that is it's the older crowd.
Because they don't have much money. I mean, what?
Well, cheap in the sense that they won't pay a little extra for good design. Either they can't discern it, or they don't think it's worth it. But an example would be a walker for somebody, an old person who's getting a walker. The problem is that it's paid for by Medicare. Medicare only pays, I don't know what the number is, $27 for a walker. Everybody knows it's a temporary solution. They're not going to use it for a long time. So the attitude is, buy the cheapest one, and when you're done, throw it out, or rent one. Rent the cheapest one, and when you're done, throw it out. There doesn't seem to be a desire for good design or even beautiful design.
No, I think you're wrong. I don't want to monopolize.
Go ahead.
First of all, I think that there's a wide variety of products where people do spend more money and buy a higher quality product. That is, it's higher quality, is often better design and fits the needs, and you see that in housewares all over the place. People do actually spend the money. And there's a special category, though, which is what you're talking about, where medical devices. And the walker is something that actually has concerned me for some time, but there are at least three that I've looked at. One is the wheelchair, the second is the cane, and the third is a walker. And actually, I've been talking to a kid who has a startup. He's trying to get it going, and he invented a fantastic walker that was beautiful and motorized, so it helped when you're seated, it helps you stand up, it lifted you up, and was attractive. And part of the goal was we should make it so attractive that people who don't need walkers would want one. But he finally decided not to do that, I think properly so, because as a startup with limited finances, that was probably too complex to start. So he decided to start with a cane. And he's doing a really nice cane, one that's attractive and fun and easy to use, but at the same time, it also does some measurements for you. So the Fitbit, if you will, is built into the cane, and it's measuring your heartbeat. So it's also, for people who have medical issues, it will be measuring things. Or for people who don't have medical issues, but I have to limp, so I use a cane, but I'm perfectly healthy, it tells me the Fitbit statistics, which helps keep me in shape. So we don't know yet whether that's a real market, but I suspect there is.
So I think it's
wheelchairs, let me just one last sentence, because maybe you could even tell us about it. Wheelchairs have dramatically improved. It used to be it was all cheap, and they were horrible. And I think it was the athletes who started pushing it that said, we need specialized wheelchairs, and they started having them designed. And, is that a special wheelchair? It looks actually, it's black.
Yeah, it's actually, it's the world's first carbon fiber wheelchair. The whole thing is made of carbon fiber. But the thing is, it's not made in the US. My last 3 wheelchairs have all been designed and built in either Germany or Sweden because the US wheelchairs are extremely crappy compared to. So I think that's because of the regulations and the whole approvals that they need to go through. So I think, and again, if you have a need, I had a need, and this chair, because it's from Sweden, it was the first one, insurance won't even consider paying for it. And I would happily buy it because for me, the value is very different. But the technology is the same as used for carbon fiber bicycles. It's no different. That's where the technology has grown up, but nobody's putting that level of design into building these things here in the US.
It has to do with the way the architecture works. My wife recently sprained her ankle and we needed a cane. We were in Italy, and I started looking at canes, and they're horrible. So we went to the sporting goods store, and we bought a walking stick. Carbon fiber again, and it was actually elegant and wonderful, expensive, but so what? It worked better.
So here's
it has to do with the way that's what you were telling me about before we came here, the market. How do you determine what to build?
Well,
tell them your model.
First of all, I'll tell you the model, but I want to tell you what's wrong with expecting good design for walkers. One is people don't expect to use them for a long time. So it's going to be discarded. And secondly, no one aspires to use a walker. People don't aspire to use a cane, but they do aspire to use a walking stick.
They used to. Back in the days, the English gentlemen had canes, which had little swords and bottles of whiskey.
And look what happened to England. That was the downfall of England.
They didn't need
You see wanting a cane-shaped fitness device. Because I have a knee that's weak, and most of the time it's fine.
But do you want
But
it
if
to
I
be...
had an excuse that it's like, well, this is because it's got Fitbit features built in.
So I want to do a harangue against market segmentation that relates to this and relates to that. Market segmentation is a way of looking at users by intersecting a demographic group with your sense of their propensity to buy what you want them to buy. And that worked in the economy of scale when people didn't have much choice. But we're now living in an economy of choice where people have too many choices. If you listen to Barry Schwartz, we're overwhelmed with choice. And that means that the power shift has occurred from the producer to the user. And that how many of you feel like you live in a market segment? No, companies think of you as being in a segment with your propensity to buy their stuff. Another model is thinking of it as user terrains, things we care about, and needs we have to fix. And companies have territories that can go into that terrain. So for home entertainment, that's a user terrain that the users care about. Netflix has to fit that in one way. Food pizza delivery service fits into it another way. Television networks fit into it another way. Companies now have to stop thinking of people living in segments and understand they live in terrains that are independent from what they want to sell. And they need to figure out how to fit into those terrains. Now to the model that Don mentioned. I'll give you the future of design in 1 minute. The problem is that the people concerned about users, and the people concerned about the offering, and the people concerned about the operations of the company, and the people concerned with the value creation, all look at the company through a different lens. And they know these other things exist. The strategists know that users exist, and that the offerings exist, and the operations exist. But they don't see how their work affects it. And the problem with designers is they look at things only from an offering and user point of view. And what we need is a model that looks at the whole thing so that when you are a designer looking at the design questions, you see how it's going to affect operations, how it's going to affect positioning, how it's going to affect the offering, et cetera, for all four positions. Schools of art, of engineering, business, and design specialize in giving people singular lenses. And it's those singular lenses that are the problem. Yes?
But actually, there's one last sentence. We'll come back. I still think that there's a real market to make a great walker that was attractive, that was a status symbol, that maybe could hold your groceries, it could be a seat when you're tired, and that, but et cetera, et cetera. But we haven't put world-class designers on them. And I think that even if they were expensive, people would aspire to them. And that would lead to competition and would lead to price coming down. But today, the walkers are so horrible. People who really need them refuse to use them.
And I'm guessing the wheelchairs in Sweden and Germany are paid for by their social safety net and their insurance.
Actually, not really. Most of them buy them themselves as well. Most of the expensive chairs, in fact, Italy, which is one of the least accessible places, has some of the has the best design chairs. In fact, they've taken like the Segway, which out here is just used for Segway doors and things like that. They've taken that, hacked it apart, put a wheelchair on it so you can go off-roading on the beach in the snow and doing all kinds of things. You can buy those readily out there. You can't buy anything like that here. So, and people buy those. They're about 30,000 euros a piece, and people buy that out of their own pocket. There's nobody else pays for it.
That's amazing. There was a question.
Back to the question, yes.
Yes.
I come from an agency background, so I'm just putting that out there for context. Oftentimes our discussions are
you come from an agency background.
Well, in the sense like I'm familiar with the design process and the discussions that happen in the rooms. So,
what kind of agency?
Advertising? Design?
Design agency, yes. So my question primarily is about, we tend to often talk about saying, why do people not pay more money for a design? And I'm just I want to get your thoughts on why you think that higher price and higher design is directly correlated versus a good design is almost a default if it's in your lap. And the reason I brought up the fact that I've had these conversations is that we're always saying, this is wonderful, let's charge more for it, which is a great business offering, right? But why is there always a premium on what should just be?
Well, you're right. There's no reason why good design is more expensive. In fact, if you use the right design process, it can be less expensive because you're correcting the errors before you ship, early on in the process.
That is true, and also that there's a bigger thing about not just the design of the product itself, but like a business model and a market context that that can make things more affordable, more accessible. Something like a wheelchair, I would imagine a person that has use for it has enough, has trouble already. And we are putting a wheelchair in the market for 30,000 euros. That just seems incredulous, even for a good design.
Well, the reason that the things are more expensive is because the companies think they can get more money for them.
That's true.
Design doesn't inherently make things more expensive.
Does it reach the number of people that have actually lost, capacity for their legs, that cannot work the jobs that they used to, and all of those kind of things. Like, it just seems quite.
Yeah, there are lots of examples of design making things cheaper, but value comes in different ways. I'm advising a consumer products company now who's interested in selling consumables to poorer communities in the American cities. And they started out setting a low price point, and they found out they couldn't meet that. Store brands, et cetera, would be cheaper. So what they're doing is looking at the issue of value differently, not as low price, but of creating value for the user. So what do you notice if you go into poor communities? You notice that their shops sell stuff that are more expensive because the transportation is bad. And so what this company is doing is exploring creating a new set of jobs for, like Uber for stuff, to create a transportation network for people who are out of work, have cars, and could make money using them, to deliver stuff, sort of back of truck sales in the poor community. So they may charge the same as the expensive products in the stores, but they're going to save those citizens a lot of time, which is the precious thing, the most precious thing for people living in the poor communities. So reframing the nature of value and cost can not only be done at the price of the product, but can look at the overall value created for the consumer.
A lot of household goods are actually very nicely designed, and that you do not pay a premium for that.
Is a question? Yeah, here.
I used to work for a telecom equipment company, and I now work for a wearables and health medical company. But in both cases, I think my experience is quite common, is that I have a lot of problem convincing the executive to invest in good design. It's primarily like engineering-driven product, right? It's kind of like asking it's the engineer that designed the user interface. It's kind of like asking a carpenter to design a building or a structural engineer to design a building. Nobody's advocating for the user point of view. I'm wondering, like, what would y'all advise us to how we can, convince company to invest?
So I told the Xerox story last night. You tell it tonight.
No, that's not the right story for this. But how do you try to convince your manager? You say you can't convince them. What argument do you use?
Well, I give example that ultimately you're designing a product for the people using it, not designing for the engineer, not
right.
designing for the salespeople, right?
That's
and
why
if you have a product that people love, then the rest essentially take care of itself.
But that's why you're failing. People try to do this. They try to say, but design is important, or people really love this design, or people are really having trouble with the way it's designed now, and they can't use it, and so on. That carries no weight. So what happens when marketing comes in and says, oh, we want to add these 3 new features? Well, how does marketing convince management? Revenue. They show the Excel spreadsheet, and they say, if you add these 3 features, sales will go up 22%, and our profit margin will increase 1%, and the increased profit in sales is X dollars, right? That's what they do.
Even though they're making it up.
Where did they get the information? Right. They made it up. So they lied. So, damn it, we can lie just as well as they can. Now, it's not a complete lie. It has to, because the executives...
There is a logic.
The executives know that they're lying, they're making up the numbers, so they have to be reasonable. They have to have a good story behind them, and we can do that too. Why would good design? It does several things. It will increase sales. It depends on the competition, but it can increase the sales, and it can reduce training costs, and it can reduce service calls. And
reduce manufacturing costs.
But the point is you can put that in your spreadsheet, and so when you go to somebody and say, people don't like it or something, what are they supposed to do? But if you say, hey, I can increase your profits, they'll get promoted for that. And so they're much more willing to listen to you. So here's what I tell designers, human-centered design. Designers, who are your users? We're doing user-centered design. Who are your users? And they'll tell people, mostly you'll tell me, the person in the store who buys a product. No, it's your boss. Actually, it's not your boss. It's the boss of your boss. And if you're agency, a consultancy. It's the client who hired you. And I always tell people that what you should do, your job is to get your client promoted. Because if you make a product that brings in more revenue, your client will get promoted. And if you, to make it bring in more revenue, you actually have to make it more attractive to the people who buy it. But you should do user-centered design and remember who your users are. It's the people who pay you.
And like the end users that we normally think of can't tell you what they really want, your clients can't normally tell you what they really want either.
But we know what they really want. They want increased profitability. So why not help them get there? Or convince them that's what we're doing, because, by the way, no one ever checks the marketing figures to see if they were right or not. So.
There was another question. Yes, sir.
So 10 years ago, I designed physical products. If you get all the use case right, you observe all the activities, you pretty much can create a very good design out of it. But 10 years later, I designed for virtual online services. So you feel like, although you get all the use case right, you get all the research right, you get all the activity to be researched, you still maybe control only 50% of the experience. The rest of the 50% is algorithm, is artificial intelligence, is something that is black magic. So I just want to kind of get your observation, like how you design experience when you don't have all the control over.
But you didn't have the control before either. That knowledge that is now in AI systems and in the information system used to be cast in metal in the machines that made the product. You just accepted those constraints and designed with them, and that's what we need to do now. It's actually easier in the software world because you can change it and adapt it and do versions faster or get away with the idea of versions altogether and just continually update it, which you couldn't do when you were designing physical products. There you had versions.
I don't like your question for several reasons. First of all, I hate use cases. Use cases are not about people. It sort of describes the activity that an agent does upon a device or this, that, and the other, which doesn't capture what people really do, which is I started to make a phone call, and then my wife asked me a question, and then I have to look up something and do the question, and now I have to continue the phone call, and I've lost the number. Why? Well, because the use case only was the use case of answering the question or the use case of dialing and not the real situation, which is life is complicated, filled with interruptions. And use cases are horrible. And they do not lead to great products. And second of all, this notion that, because our products are smarter, more intelligent, and can do new things. Actually, we have 3 people right there who are experts in doing this. That doesn't make it any easier to design. It doesn't take away your responsibility to design. It's a different life, that's all. So if you design an OK Google, Google now, or if you design a Siri, that's a hard problem. Those are really actually harder to design and get them right and make you feel good, because they're going to make errors all the time and give you the wrong answers. And what you wanted is that you don't mind the wrong answer. You find it useful enough. And it doesn't say, error, didn't understand you. It does something more intelligent.
And it gives you a way to repair and recover.
The repair and recover is the hard part of designing this stuff.
One of the things discovered in this building.
And I see the person from Nuance nodding his head, yes, and the people from Xerox nodding their heads. That's what's hard. Siri uses Nuance, by the way.
You have a question?
So you were saying we should line our spreadsheets. The question is...
You should use spreadsheets. Let's do it that way.
No, but my real question is, since most of us don't work in spreadsheets typically, how do we go about doing that? Where do we find information to help say, by including design, going to increase profitability or reduce service cost or what? What's the starting point for that?
I'm sorry, you've got to go back to Cisco and use spreadsheets. Because, look, that's the language of business. The language of business is profit and loss and margins. And so you have to speak the language of business. And if you can't, not everybody has to, but at least one person in your team has to be able to put together that argument.
So I have a
if
modified
you don't want
answer.
to do it, I once said, there's not enough designers who are vice presidents and senior vice presidents or even CEOs, and how come? And somebody once complained and said, I said, why do engineers get promoted? And they said, oh, well, they go to school and get MBAs. Well, yeah, exactly. Why don't more designers get MBAs?
I can probably find doing the spreadsheets, it's just that I don't have good ideas about how to begin to find data that would be.
So let me try to answer the question. In design, we do a lot of sketching. We do sketching of products, sketches of environments, sketches of information that's going to be published. They're early, very fast, very cheap ways of exploring what might be. Before going to spreadsheets, in all their detail, you can do something called value webs. So imagine a value web being entities between businesses or people that can exchange money or receive money or receive other types of value. And imagine the value web for phones before the iPhone. And then imagine the value web of all the exchange of value afterwards. You can sketch those things at the same time you're sketching products. At the same time you're sketching operating systems using activity systems, not operating systems, activity systems. At the same time you're sketching use cases. And there's no reason to limit early sketching and early prototyping to the offering. You can prototype all parts of the four lenses of the offering, value web, the way the company operates, and the user. Sketching a value web can be done in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but it still doesn't get you to talk the language of business, which is, again, dollars. And I think you do...
Value webs can include dollars.
Well, let me answer how we get the numbers. So how does marketing get the numbers? We look at the sales figures. We look at the costs. We look at the cost of service calls and repairs and returns. And then we try to estimate if we could only make a 1% difference. That's how all startups are, right? It's a $100 billion market. If we only had 1%, we can surely get 1%. Why then we'll have 1 billion? That's the kind of argument that you make. And it has to be a realistic percentage, but you do start off with the real numbers about real sales and real profits and existing product. That's what the marketing people do, and they're very good at it.
That works with existing products, but if you're doing
well,
something
that's what we're talking
radically
about. We're trying to say why we should get better design into this existing product. Okay. And how do you convince them to spend the extra money or to change the product process in order to allow this to happen? And you do it by this argument. And again, become friends with the marketing people. They're good at it. Let them do it for you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying there's this other side you still have to finish.
Yeah, doing things for incremental change on existing products is different from doing extensions into new areas, which is different from doing things that are fundamentally new. And most companies have the front end of development process totally geared for the first group of doing incremental changes to existing products. And most companies don't have the pliancy in the front end of development to deal with extensions that are big jumps or radically new things. Their development process is geared to reduce risk, not to create great stuff.
So I'm not expecting a solution, but maybe some comments on a particular dilemma I'm interested in working with aging in place. So your 4 rules that I paraphrased hundreds of times of a design should be intuitive. If not that, it should be something like something you're already doing. If not that, then it should be something clearly constructed. And if not that, it's called a bad design. So I say that to people. But in aging in place, as people age, they tend to become more and more rigid in their patterns and more comfortable with the particular devices, gadgets, tools that they've been using. And then as people age, because of vision, hearing, motor skills, disease, whatever, those things don't work. The eye-hand coordination isn't as good as it was, those things. And so now you're faced with this dilemma where you want to change to something simpler, but it's not something that is comfortable or familiar. And so over and over again, we run into this problem with devices, products, consumer products, for people as they age where what's comfortable for them no longer works, and the new thing doesn't work because it's different than what they're used to. And I'm sure you have personal examples. You can imagine you buy a car, it's got easier controls on it, but it doesn't have that old comfortable stick shift that your dad used.
I haven't seen any modern car that has easier controls. They're all a disaster.
Once you take off features, but that isn't commonly done. So this is a problem that we see over and over.
I just heard from someone who said, what about us old folks who could pick up the tablet, which is a dramatically new device, and we love it, and it's the first time I can finally use it and understand it. Doesn't that contradict your argument?
So I'm not arguing. What I'm describing is the way the world is.
No, I don't agree with
you.
you.
The thing that we're most comfortable with no longer works for us, and change to something simpler is a change that's also difficult.
But you're assuming that the change has to be something simpler in whatever dimension that is. Look, again, I really believe if I had a real example in front of me, we could figure out how to make this thing that was better for the people. And it isn't necessarily easier. We try to figure out what the real issues are, and we try to overcome them. And I don't see that's any different than any of the other problems I solve. And as for getting more rigid as you get older, well, there are several different reasons for it. I'll tell you one reason I get more rigid. How many computer languages have I learned in my lifetime? 20, 30? How many word processor systems have I learned in my lifetime? And if I count every new variation of Microsoft Word, it's huge. And I'm just sick and tired of learning a new thing. And every time I pick up a new device, I have to learn it. Every time I buy a new car, I have to read the manual, for God's sakes, to figure out how to change the radio station, and so on and so forth. It's not that I'm more rigid. I'm just sick and tired of this nonsense. And the reason kids pick it up, because they don't read the manuals, they play, they experiment, they spend more time than I'm going to spend doing this, that, and this. They don't understand what they're doing one bit, but they've learned the patterns to be able to do it. So I don't think it's a problem of rigidity. I think it's a problem of addressing the needs of this group of people. So I can't see as well anymore, so I need bigger targets. And my hand control isn't as good. Yeah, I need bigger targets.
Other questions?
Last question. We'll have this as our last question.
Okay.
Who wants to give the brilliant last question?
Maybe right here.
I'm letting Patrick decide.
Go ahead.
So you say that to design for the activity instead of the person. How do you fit that with the design principle?
Could you repeat that? How do you
fit the design principles with the activity versus the group of people that you're targeting to that will be using your product or solution?
How do you fit the design principles?
What design?
How do you define the design principles when you're looking at the activity versus the segment?
I think it depends what you mean by design principles.
Limitation, zero maintenance, for the seniors, the older, for example, people with disabilities.
So the particular design principles of a project should come out of the observation of the activity. They're not a separate thing. There are the type of design principles that you described, which can be thought of as a type of design principle. You don't go into the idea of infallibility or impossible to fail.
Yeah,
one could argue that you want things to fail, but you'll be able to recover from the failure so that you learn about it. But you don't know whether you want it to be fail-proof or to be certain to fail and recoverable until you watch the activities of people.
I don't even understand the question, because what I want to do is I'll watch activities and I'll understand what the requirements are. And so, I have little Post-it notes that tell me all the different things that people do and how they're interrupted or what the environment is like. And I try to then understand how they fit together in pattern. And now it's a design problem. I have many multiple constraints, and I have to figure out how to solve it. So that's where my creativity comes in. And we also do tests. So the design cycle that we always recommend is it's observation, ideation, rapid prototype, paper if necessary, sketches, test.
It depends upon your goal. I'll use a Bill Buxton example. How many people here think it's always good for interfaces to be simpler? How many can think of conditions when it's better for them to be more complex?
Well, I wrote a whole book about it, for God's sake.
Most people in the design world think that simplicity is better, but you don't get great music out of a recorder like you do out of a saxophone. That's the Bill Buxton example. You need the complex interface in that condition, and then another condition when
He's
the
never
person's-
played a recorder. It's actually harder than a saxophone. The saxophone has all these levers. So if I push just one lever, it pushes down covers three holes. In the recorder, you have to do it with your fingers, and it's really hard.
It may be hard, but to do a saxophone with the...
It's the same fingering, by the way. The recorder and the saxophone are essentially the same fingering. The difference is you have keys and levers to make it much easier with the saxophone and clarinet and flute, and you don't on the recorder.
And starting from knowing nothing about either, which would produce a tune first? The recorder.
It's actually both of them produce horrible sounds at first.
Okay. Well, on that note.
You want to end on horrible sounds?
Well, no. I want to end on a funny note here. Yeah, at least it's a note.
Well, part of what we tried to do, I think, is that design is a complex field. It has to cover human behavior, but also economic and business behavior. And, of course, the complexity of the materials that we use. And so you heard us dancing around these issues, trying to say how we put them together. And design is primarily an atheoretical field. The design of everyday things has a bunch of theory in it, but it's all about interaction design, which is only a small part of design. Patrick is now writing a book in which he's trying to produce a higher level analysis of theories of how you put these things together. But it's actually mostly an atheoretical field. And that's why you heard us discussing things the way we did. And maybe why some of your questions were the way they were phrased, because you too are struggling to try to pinpoint into the areas of design.
And the reason it's without theory is because the graduate schools of design, for the most part, are abrogating their responsibility to think about what design is.
But that's because most of these designers were trained in our schools of art or architecture, and they don't understand the same notion of theory that we do in engineering and science. And actually, there's a whole bunch of us trying to change this. There are some good design schools like Delft, like the Institute of Design.
KAIST.
Well, not so good. KAIST in Korea.
Compared to the normal design school, they're very good.
And I've just set up a design program in San Diego. We're not actually going to have students to start with, but one of our goals is to try to put more science and more understanding of the design process. But that's, I think, why also when you go to talks on design, you very seldom get people discussing the theoretical basis. And why even when we try to do that, well, we don't have much of a base to stand on.
You've had great questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you. We'll have a short reception outside, and remember we're selling Don's book, so on your way out, if you'd like, feel free to pick one up. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.